Now, new figures from the UN show that a spike in the number of people forced to leave their homes due to conflict. Globally, over 122 million people are currently forcibly displaced from where they once lived due to factors such as war, disasters and persecution. To give you some perspective, that is more than the populations of Spain and the United Kingdom combined. Well, David Miliband is the president and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. He's also the former British Foreign Secretary, and he spoke to me earlier about the displacement crisis. When you raise the alarm now, when you speak to political leaders, do you think they're listening? Do enough of them care?
Well, I think that there's a predominant focus on the domestic front of politics, but as we're seeing with events in the Middle East today, the outside world can come crashing in. And I think it's very important to understand that the kind of figures that are produced by the United Nations, they measure only those people who are fleeing from conflict and disaster. So this is related to, but separate from, the whole debate about migration. Our point as a humanitarian non-governmental organization is very simple. First, these are real people, and there are lives at stake. There are lives at stake in many of the poorest countries in the world. 1/3 of the displaced people in the world come from just 4 countries, starting with Sudan, including Syria, Ukraine and Afghanistan. But there's a second point as well revealed in the figures. 9 million refugees went home this year. And that's important as well. And we can talk about the Syrian case, but it's very striking that 450,000 people have gone back to Syria. That shows what happens when peace is restored. People do want to go home.
You bring up the events that are happening in the Middle East as we speak. Some of the worst hunger crises, they're in places like Gaza, also the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are also among the biggest displacement emergencies that we're seeing. And I'm curious if you're seeing concrete impacts from aid cuts, the likes of which we've seen from the US, from the UK, being felt on the ground in places like that.
The thing about the humanitarian aid budgets is that there's nowhere else for people to go. People depend on these for the food, for the medicine, for the healthcare, to survive, never mind for the education and the livelihoods support. So this is really the sharpest of the sharp end. And I think the UN figures that have been published show there could hardly be a worse time to be cutting aid budgets.
And if you take a look at the situation here, domestically speaking, we're having this conversation in the United States, immigration policy under intense scrutiny, especially amid what we've seen in Los Angeles this week. The Trump administration argues they're trying to get a handle on the fallout from the Biden administration's immigration policy. Is what we have seen on the ground in LA the right way to go about it, in your opinion?
Well, there's a lot packed into that, because of course immigration is separate from, though related to, refugee and asylum issues. The failure in the US to pass an immigration act since 1986 means that there's overwhelming pressure on the asylum side of things. Obviously, it's very important that all sides follow the law at every single point. And there are massive constitutional issues that American levels of government, tiers of government, need to debate amongst themselves. Our point is that upstream around the world, there are crises that will spill over onto America's shores if they're not dealt with at home. And that's very, very important as we go forward and think about foreign aid and the future of foreign aid, given the administration's proposal to reduce it by about 85%.
But specifically with some of those scenes that we've seen with the ICE raids, for example, in Los Angeles, I mean, do you consider that to be responsible leadership?
I think the most responsible thing that I can do is not comment on things where I haven't got the details. If there are details that I'm aware of, I'm very happy to talk to you about them. But when it's unspecified cases, it's not right to venture in where one doesn't have the facts. I know that from my current role as well as from my role in the past. What I do know is that refugees and immigrants have made an enormous contribution to this country over its whole history. And it's very important that there are effective, regularized, legal, efficient ways of deciding who is able to stay here, how long they're able to stay here, and what their contribution should be here.